What if the person you trusted most was the one quietly planning to take everything from you? I didn't see it at first. You probably wouldn't either. It all started in the sunshine of Malibu, in a house that smelled like salt air and cedar wood. The waves outside the big glass windows sang me to sleep most nights, and when I woke up, the light was soft and golden, spilling over the ocean like melted copper. That house wasn't just a home. It was history, it was my mother's legacy, and it was the heart of everything I thought I could protect. When Chris came into my life, I told myself it was fate. He was charming in a way that made you feel like the only person in the room. You know the type. He'd lock eyes with you across a crowded place, and it felt like gravity itself pulled you closer. He had the kind of smile that seemed rehearsed but convincing enough to make you forget to question it. I thought, after years of building a career and taking care of everyone else, that maybe this was my time to be taken care of. Looking back, the signs were there. But back then, all I saw was the promise of love. He loved to cook elaborate dinners. He'd light candles, open a bottle of wine, talk about dreams that felt so aligned with mine. At night, when the ocean was loud against the shore, he'd whisper plans of building a life together, forever. It sounded like safety. It sounded like home. Here's the thing. People like Chris don't come into your life loud. They slip in quietly, like a shadow that feels familiar. He started small. "Let me handle that bill," he'd say. Or, "Why don't we set up a joint account? It'll make life easier." You don't think twice, because isn't that what partners do? But now, when I replay those moments in my head, I see how carefully each move was laid out. Like a chess game where I thought we were equals, but he'd already studied all the possible plays. Do you ever wonder when a fairy tale starts to sour? For me, it wasn't one big fight. It was a series of tiny fractures. A hesitation in his voice when I mentioned keeping the Malibu house in my name. A flicker in his eyes when I said I wanted to expand my company without outside investors. Little things, easy to dismiss, until they weren't. I remember one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the deck, the Pacific stretching wide and endless. He poured me coffee and asked, almost too casually, "What's the point of holding on to that house? We could sell it, invest, double our wealth." The way he said our wealth stuck with me. Something tightened in my chest. I brushed it off, laughed even, but my stomach knotted in a way I couldn't shake. Still, I convinced myself to ignore it. Because when you've built an entire story around someone, you don't want to believe it's the wrong script. You edit out the doubts, cut the scenes that don't fit. You tell yourself, this is just a bump, this is just adjustment. But the bumps became patterns. He grew restless whenever I made decisions without him. He wanted to know every account detail, every contract. And when I pushed back, he'd flip it. "Don't you trust me?" That's how manipulation sounds. Soft. Like love. Until you realize it's tightening around you like a rope. I'd walk through the Malibu house at night, barefoot on the cool wooden floors, and feel my chest heavy. This house had stood against storms, against years of change. My mother left it to me because she believed I'd protect it. And here I was, slowly letting someone else plant roots in soil that wasn't his. I wish I could say I confronted it then, that I drew a line, that I trusted my instincts. But the truth? I wanted the love story more than I wanted the truth. And isn't that how so many of us get caught? You want the dream so badly you silence the warnings. Looking back, I see how it built, how each small concession led to a bigger one. A joint account turned into shared investments. A casual suggestion turned into pressure. A smile turned into control. It was all so subtle, but the weight of it was pressing me down. And yet, on the surface, everything still looked perfect. Dinner parties in Malibu, vacations that looked good on Instagram, smiles that photographed well. To anyone watching, we were golden. But inside, I was starting to feel the cracks widening. The question I kept asking myself, quietly, when the lights were off, was this: if I walk away, do I lose love? Or do I save myself? I didn't have the answer then. I only knew that something in me was shifting, like the tide pulling back before a storm. And even though I didn't realize it, that storm was already on the horizon, waiting to break everything open. Because what I didn't know yet was this: the Malibu house wasn't just a home Chris wanted to share. It was the prize he was planning to take, and once you see someone's true game, you can never unsee it. Do you know how sometimes everything looks perfect in the light, but when you tilt your head, shadows start to stretch across the picture? That's what living with Chris became. On the surface, we were the couple everyone envied. Malibu dinners, weekend road trips. Friends who said, "You two are perfect together." But inside the walls of my life, little cracks were forming. It started with small remarks, things you'd probably ignore. He'd laugh when I triple-checked a contract. He'd tease me about being too careful with money. At first I brushed it off. That's what love is, right? You let things slide. But soon, the tone shifted. "Why do you need your own account?" he'd ask. "Don't you trust me?" Words like that don't shout, they whisper. And sometimes, whispers echo louder than screams. I'd catch him staring at my desk when he thought I wasn't looking, not at me, at the papers, the spreadsheets, the statements. He'd linger, eyes tracing numbers he never earned, and when I'd ask, "What are you doing?" he'd smile like I was imagining it. Maybe I wanted to believe I was imagining it. One night, he poured 2 glasses of wine and leaned across the table. "We should buy property together," he said. "A new place, something fresh." Why keep holding on to an old house? Old house. That's how he described Malibu, my mother's legacy, my anchor. I felt heat rise in my face, but I swallowed it. I told myself he just didn't understand what it meant to me. But deep down, I did understand. He wasn't talking about a future. He was talking about control. That's the thing about manipulation. It doesn't storm the door. It seeps in through the cracks, disguised as love, disguised as logic. He started checking in on where I was going, asking for receipts, suggesting better ways to manage my team at work. The freedom I'd built piece by piece started shrinking, like walls closing in. And yet, in the daylight, everything looked flawless. Friends came over, and he charmed them. My colleagues met him, and they called me lucky. "He's so supportive," they'd say. I smiled, nodded, played along. But when the night came, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing pieces of myself one compromise at a time. Do you know that knot in your stomach when something feels off, but you can't prove it? That was my life. Every laugh felt rehearsed, every touch measured. And yet, when he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me, I wanted so badly to believe it was real. The shadows grew darker when he began pushing harder. "Why don't we combine everything? It'll make life easier." His voice was soft, but his eyes were sharp. I pushed back gently. He pulled guilt out like a weapon. "Don't you see? I'm trying to build us a future." Future. That word clung to me, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. There was one evening, fog rolling in from the ocean, the house wrapped in gray. I was sitting on the deck, sweater pulled tight, listening to the waves slam against the rocks. He sat beside me, his arm heavy on my shoulders. "You're too attached to this place," he said. "It's just wood and stone." I turned to him, anger rising, but the words caught in my throat. Because how do you explain that a house isn't wood and stone? It's memory, it's promise. It's a mother's voice telling you, "Protect this." That was the first night I cried quietly into my pillow, afraid to let him see. I felt foolish. I felt small. But mostly, I felt the shift, like sunlight slipping behind clouds, leaving only the chill. And yet, I stayed. Why? Because walking away meant admitting I'd been wrong. It meant unraveling the love story I had told myself for years, and sometimes the story feels safer than the truth. If you've ever ignored your own instincts, you know the taste it leaves, bitter, heavy. You know you're betraying yourself, but you hope it'll pass. You hope the person will change, but shadows don't fade on their own. They stretch, they spread. By the time I realized how deep they had grown, it was almost too late. Because what Chris wanted wasn't me. It wasn't love. It was the house, the company, the life I'd built. And once I started seeing that clearly, there was no going back. The sunshine was still there, bright as ever. But I could no longer ignore the shadows. And soon, those shadows would turn into a storm. It was a Tuesday. Funny how certain days etch themselves into memory, not because they were planned or special, but because they broke something open. I was at my desk in the Malibu house, the ocean muffled behind the glass, papers scattered, coffee going cold, the phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it ring out. Almost, I answered. Is this Sophia? A woman's voice, shaky but firm. I hesitated. Yes. Who's this? There was a pause, the kind that stretches too long, where you feel your heartbeat in your throat. Then she said it. My name's Caroline. I used to be married to Chris. Everything inside me froze. Do you know that moment when time bends, when the ordinary day turns into something you'll never forget? That was it. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired, almost broken. She didn't ask me questions. She told me facts. How he'd swept her off her feet. How he'd whispered about forever. How he pushed her to combine assets, to dream bigger, to trust him completely. And then, how it all unraveled. The lies, the withdrawals, the divorce papers she didn't see coming until she had nothing left. I sat there, pen in hand, scribbling notes I didn't want to believe. My chest burned. My palms were damp. I whispered, "That can't be him." But deep down, every word she said clicked into place, like puzzle pieces I had been avoiding. "You don't know me," she said, but I couldn't stay quiet. "I saw pictures of you two, and I know how he works. You need to protect yourself. Protect myself." Those two words echoed long after the call ended. I hung up, but the silence felt louder than the ocean outside. My reflection in the glass looked different, older, wary, scared. I replayed his smile in my head, the way he'd say, "Trust me." I replayed his push to sell Malibu, his obsession with numbers that weren't his. It all lined up. And here's the thing. You want to dismiss it. You want to cling to the story you've been telling yourself. Love makes you stubborn. But when someone else describes your life like they've lived it before, you can't ignore it anymore. That night Chris came home, humming like nothing was wrong. He kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I stared at him and almost asked, almost confronted him, but I didn't. Because I needed time. I needed proof. I smiled back, hiding the storm inside me. My hands shook as I set the table. He poured wine, told a joke, laughed. And all I could hear was Caroline's voice. "You need to protect yourself." Later, when he was in the shower, I scrolled through old photos, old emails, searching for cracks. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew I couldn't unhear that call. It wasn't paranoia anymore, it was survival. That was the night I stopped pretending. The night I admitted to myself that the love story I thought I was living might be a script he had written long before me. The call didn't just change everything, it saved me. Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. And once you've been warned, you have a choice. Ignore it or act. I didn't know then how far I'd have to go, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The shadows weren't shadows anymore. They were proof, and I wasn't going to wait until he turned my life into another one of his cautionary tales. Have you ever felt that itch, that restless pull inside your chest when you realize the world you're living in might be built on a lie? That was me. I couldn't shake Caroline's words. They lived in my head like an echo that refused to fade. Protect yourself. So, I began. Not with a plan, not with certainty, but with quiet desperation. At first, it was subtle. I went through our shared files, the Dropbox folders where Chris kept business notes. I expected spreadsheets and proposals. What I found instead were half-finished drafts, pitches that never left the page, invoices with names I didn't recognize. One PDF opened into a scanned receipt from an upscale hotel in Dallas. The date? A weekend he'd sworn he was at a conference in Denver. I remember holding my breath as I scrolled through. The numbers blurred, but the pattern was sharp. Hidden dinners. Flights that didn't match his calendar. Expenses routed through shell companies. It wasn't just messy bookkeeping. It was deception dressed up as ambition. At night, I tested him with small questions. So, how was the Denver trip? He smiled, poured wine, and told me about networking dinners. His voice smooth, eyes steady. If I hadn't seen the receipt, I might have believed him. And that was the terrifying part, how easily he could bend reality with a calm tone. I started saving everything, screenshots, emails, receipts. I bought an external hard drive and hid it inside an old shoebox in the back of the closet. Each file felt like a lifeline, a piece of armor. Because once you see the cracks, you know the collapse is coming. The only question is when. But the digging wasn't just digital. I reached out to people quietly. A casual coffee with Jenna, a woman Chris had once called a flaky investor. Her hands shook as she stirred her latte. He promised us a return. Said we were weeks away from a breakthrough. Then he vanished. No updates, no money back. Her voice cracked. He's good at making you feel like you're the only one. That line gutted me, because wasn't that what he'd done to me? Made me feel chosen, unique, irreplaceable. Until you realize it's just a script he runs on everyone. Each story I collected stacked on the last. A contractor in Chicago who never got paid. A friend of his, from college, who turned out to be a stranger with a lawsuit. I pieced it together like a crime board only I could see. The charming man in my kitchen wasn't just flawed. He was dangerous. Still, there were moments I doubted myself. I'd watch him sleeping, his face relaxed, the rise and fall of his chest steady. Could this man, the one who once stayed up all night to rub my back when I was sick, really be capable of this much cruelty? My heart wavered, but my notes didn't lie. Caroline didn't lie. And the hollow in my gut told me the truth was sharper than any excuse. Then came the night I found the hidden account, a password-protected folder buried under layers of financial reports. My hands shook as I typed his usual codes, birthdays, pet names, anniversaries. None worked. Finally, I tried the day we met. It opened. Inside were transfers, tens of thousands wired overseas, accounts and names I didn't recognize, dates aligned with our trips, our investments. My stomach dropped. It wasn't carelessness, it was deliberate. He was siphoning money right under my nose. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and listened to the hum of the fridge. My world tilted. I wasn't just a partner in love. I was a pawn in a scheme. And suddenly, it wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about survival. The next morning, Chris made pancakes. He joked about the syrup being the cheap kind. He smiled at me, kissed my forehead, called me Soph. I smiled back, my mouth tasting like ash, because now every word, every gesture felt like theater, a role he was playing. And here's the part no one tells you. Gathering proof doesn't make you feel powerful. It makes you feel trapped, like holding a ticking bomb and waiting for the explosion. Because once you know, you can't unknow. But acting on it? That's a whole different terror. I kept digging, because I had to. Each clue pushed me closer to a cliff I wasn't ready to face. But the truth is, once you start investigating, you're no longer living in the relationship, you're surviving it. And survival demands clarity. Even when it shatters you, there's a moment you can't rehearse. You can replay it in your head, plan every word, but when it comes, your voice shakes anyway. That was me, standing in our kitchen, holding my coffee mug like it was a shield. The morning light streamed through the blinds, cutting across Chris's face as he scrolled his phone. I had rehearsed this. All night, actually. I'd pictured myself calm, firm, maybe even a little detached. But my hands betrayed me. They trembled, the mug rattling against the counter. "Chris," I said. My throat tightened. "We need to talk." He looked up, puzzled. "Sure, what's up?" I tried to start small. "Your Denver trip. Who was it with?" His eyebrows lifted just slightly, like someone caught off guard but not surprised. "Business contacts, I told you." My chest burned. I reached for the folder I had prepared. Printouts, receipts, screenshots. I slid it across the counter. "Then explain this." He flipped through slowly, almost casually. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Sophie, you've been snooping." The way he said it, like I was the one out of line, made my blood rush. Snooping? These are lies, Chris. You lied to me, to them, to everyone. He leaned back, arms folded, and gave me that calm, rehearsed tone I'd grown to dread. "You're overreacting. It's business." Complicated, sure, but not what you think. But I couldn't unsee the transfers, the names, the patterns. "Not what I think?" "You drained accounts. You built this entire life on smoke and mirrors, and you dragged me into it." His eyes darkened then, the mask slipped. "Dragged you in?" "You enjoyed the lifestyle, Sophie. The trips, the dinners, the house. Don't act like you didn't. That cut deep. Because yes, I had enjoyed it. I had believed in it. But enjoying the fruits of love isn't the same as condoning fraud. I thought I was building a future with you, not funding a scam." The air between us thickened. He stood, closing the distance, lowering his voice. "You don't want to make this messy, trust me." The words chilled me. It wasn't a threat in volume, but in weight, a warning. I held his gaze anyway. "It's already messy, Chris. You made it that way, silence. The kind that feels like glass about to shatter." He turned, grabbed his keys and left. The door slammed harder than it needed to. My knees gave out. I slid to the floor, surrounded by proof, by silence, by the echo of his threat. This was the first battle, and I knew it was only the beginning. But here's the truth. Confrontation doesn't give closure. It opens wounds wider. It tests how much truth you can stand in one sitting. And sometimes, survival means saying the words anyway. Even if your voice shakes, even if it changes everything. Do you know that moment when everything flips? When you think you're bracing yourself for impact, but the ground gives way in a direction you never expected? That's exactly how it felt the day the truth came at me sideways. I wasn't digging that day. I wasn't scrolling through files or chasing shadows. I was just living. I was at a cafe in Santa Monica, sipping iced tea, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. For a second, I almost convinced myself things could go back to normal. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message. Unknown number again. Just 2 words. Check courthouse. At first I laughed. Spam, I thought. Another scam. But curiosity. It's a dangerous thing. I typed his name into the county records. My hands went cold. Case after case appeared. Fraud, embezzlement, civil suits, even sealed settlements. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. My stomach dropped. He wasn't unlucky. He wasn't misunderstood. He was practiced, calculated. Every business trip, every missing dollar, it all snapped into focus. That night I waited. I watched him pour his drink, loosen his tie, sit like a king in his chair. I asked, calm but sharp, "Ever been to court, Chris?" He froze. For the first time, his mask slipped without him meaning it to. "Where did you hear that?" His tone wasn't playful. It was cornered. I leaned forward. How many Sophias, how many Carolines have there been before me? Silence. The kind that swallows sound. His jaw tightened. Then he laughed, low, forced. "You don't understand how the world works. People sue. Deals fall apart. It's business." But it wasn't business. It was theft, betrayal, manipulation. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for my savings. I was fighting for my sanity, for my story. He stood, pacing, voice rising. "You think you can walk away? You think you can expose me? Everything you have. Everything you have because of me." The words rattled me, but they also clarified everything. He wanted me to believe I was powerless. That's the oldest trick in the book. But once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The twist wasn't just in the records. The twist was inside me. I wasn't the naive woman anymore. I wasn't the one nodding, smiling, swallowing doubt. I saw him clearly, for what he was and for what I wasn't willing to be anymore. And here's the thing. A twist doesn't resolve the story. It complicates it. It heightens the stakes. That night didn't end with me packing a bag or calling the cops. It ended with me staring at him across the room, two people who knew the truth but hadn't said it out loud. The war line had been drawn, and both of us knew it. That's the midpoint of every story, isn't it? The moment you realize the fight isn't about evidence or words anymore, it's about survival. And survival, I decided, meant being smarter, quieter, and one step ahead. Because the biggest twist wasn't his record. The biggest twist was me finally stepping into my power. You ever notice how one discovery doesn't just sit quietly in your mind? It grows. It multiplies. Like a crack in glass, spreading wider every day until you can't ignore it. That's what happened after I found the records. It started small, an unease that wouldn't leave me alone. I'd hear his voice across the room and wonder, who else has he said those same lines to? I'd see his phone face down on the counter and think, what's hiding under that black screen? Once you see the truth, every detail becomes suspicious, every silence too loud. I couldn't unknow it, and he could sense I'd changed. The air between us grew sharp, like static before a storm. He'd ask, "Why are you so quiet lately?" And I'd smile thinly, pretending. But inside, I was replaying every story he'd ever told, searching for cracks. The escalation didn't happen in one blow-up fight. It was drip by drip, like poison in the water. He started coming home later, excuses flimsy. I'd ask about the courthouse cases, and he'd snap, "You don't understand business." He stopped masking the anger, stopped softening his words. And me? I stopped being afraid of the silence. One night, though, it broke. He slammed a drawer shut so hard the handle cracked. Papers flew everywhere. Bank statements, hidden accounts, transfers I never knew existed. I stared down at numbers that didn't make sense. And for the first time, he didn't try to cover it. He just glared. "You shouldn't have seen that." I froze, but not because I was scared. Because I realized something. He wasn't worried about me leaving. He was worried about me speaking. That's when it clicked. His power had never been money. It was silence. As long as no one spoke, as long as no one looked too close, he thrived. But when silence breaks, his empire crumbles. The fallout was swift. He started shadowing me, asking who I was texting, double-checking where I went. He turned paranoia into a daily ritual. And the more he clung, the clearer it became. He knew his time was running out. I confided in a friend, just one. I remember whispering over coffee, my hands shaking. She grabbed my wrist and said, "You can't fight this alone." Her words echoed in my head for days. And here's the thing about escalation. It isn't just about fights or slammed doors. It's about clarity. About realizing the person across from you is not who you thought. It's about feeling the floor tilt beneath your feet and deciding finally that you won't just stand there. The fallout wasn't a single explosion. It was a steady unraveling. Trust gone, fear gone too. What was left was something sharper. Resolve. Because once you've seen the pattern, once you've felt the glass crack all the way through, you only have two choices. Stay shattered or step out. And I knew which one I had to take. There's a point where you stop asking questions, where the curiosity, the suspicion, the aching doubt, they all sharpen into something else, a decision. I remember standing in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, and realizing, tonight, it ends. I didn't plan it with charts or strategies. It wasn't some cinematic build-up. It was exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep exhaustion. You can only live split in two for so long, one half pretending everything is fine, the other screaming inside. And when those halves finally collapse into each other, that's when the confrontation comes. He walked in late, the smell of cologne that wasn't mine trailing behind him. His tie loosened, his eyes glazed with a kind of arrogance that only comes when someone thinks they'll never be caught. He poured himself a drink, casual as ever, like the cracks weren't already spreading across the foundation. I asked one question, just one. "Who is she?" He froze. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth. His silence was louder than a confession. And when he finally laughed, dismissive, cruel, it wasn't the sound of a man denying. It was the sound of someone who thinks the truth no longer matters. That laugh lit the fuse. I pushed harder. Every detail I'd collected, every inconsistency I'd stored away, came pouring out, the late nights, the missing money, the names I'd overheard. One by one, I laid them on the table like evidence in a courtroom. And for the first time, I watched his mask slip. He tried rage, slammed his fist on the counter, shattered the glass in his hand. He tried pity. "You're imagining things. You're tired. You're overthinking." He even tried charm, that poisonous smile he'd used on so many others. But the thing about reaching the climax is, there's no turning back. I wasn't the same person anymore. His tricks, his games, his practiced words, they slid right off me. And that terrified him more than anything. The shouting escalated, the walls catching every syllable, bouncing them back like echoes in a cave. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. It was the taste of freedom in my mouth, bitter and sharp. At one point, he leaned in close, his voice low, threatening. "You don't know what you're doing," but I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was tearing down the last illusion, ripping apart the story he'd written for me and writing my own. The confrontation wasn't about winning an argument. It wasn't about getting him to admit or to beg or to apologize. It was about standing there, unflinching, and saying, "I see you now, and I'm not afraid." By the time the shouting ended, the night had stretched thin and fragile. He stormed out, door slamming so hard the windows rattled. And me? I sank to the floor, shaking, not from fear, but from the weight lifting. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The climax isn't the end of the story, but it is the moment that changes everything. It's the fire you walk through, the breaking point you survive, that proves you're not just a bystander in your own life. And if you've ever faced that moment, when truth and courage collide, you know, the hardest part isn't confronting them. It's confronting the part of yourself that once believed the lie. Morning light has a way of making everything look softer, almost merciful. But that first morning after, When the dust had barely settled from the night before, nothing felt soft. The sun streamed through the curtains, dust motes floating in the air like tiny reminders that life keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair used to mean comfort routine, breakfast shared in silence or laughter, but now it was just empty wood and fabric. Funny how something so ordinary can suddenly carry so much weight. The silence was different. Not the tense, waiting silence of suspicion, but the raw, echoing quiet that follows an explosion. My hands shook when I reached for my coffee, the cup rattling against the saucer. That's when it hit me. This was the aftermath. No more pretending. No more bargaining with lies. Just me, in the ruins, deciding what pieces were worth saving. People always talk about closure like it's neat, like it's something you can check off a list. But closure doesn't arrive with a bow. It creeps in slowly, through messy mornings and sleepless nights, through moments when you replay every word, wondering if you could have said less or more. Through the sharp pang when you pass their jacket still hanging by the door. In those first days, I swung between anger and grief like a pendulum that never rests. I'd remember his laugh and feel hollow. Then I'd recall his smirk from the night before and feel flames rise in my chest. You tell yourself you're done. But emotions don't follow clean lines. They loop, they twist, they betray you when you least expect it. But here's the thing. In that chaos, I found clarity. I began writing down every thought, every feeling, like letters to myself. It wasn't about recording what happened. It was about reminding myself who I was becoming. Stronger, sharper, someone who chose truth over illusion. One afternoon, I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. His shirts hung there, neatly pressed, smelling faintly of cologne. For a moment, I almost collapsed under the weight of memory. But instead of breaking, I started packing. One shirt, then another. The sound of hangers clinking together became a kind of rhythm, like a drumbeat of liberation. By the time the suitcase was full, I realized something. Letting go doesn't mean erasing the past. It means refusing to let it chain you. Friends called, voices laced with worry. Some wanted details, others offered silence. My mother's voice cracked on the phone, but she didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Come home if you need to." That's when I learned another truth. Sometimes strength doesn't come from standing alone. It comes from letting others hold you when your knees give way. The reflection part, the looking back, it didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, like peeling layers off an onion. Painful, messy, but necessary. I started seeing patterns I'd ignored. The subtle dismissals, the way he always made me feel small in conversations, the red flags I'd painted green because I wanted so badly to believe. And in those reflections, something shifted. I stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" That single shift turned mourning into momentum. I began to notice beauty again, the smell of rain on the sidewalk, the sound of kids laughing in the park, even the way the city buzzed at night, alive with stories that weren't mine to carry. It reminded me that the world is bigger than betrayal, that life doesn't end because someone else broke their promise. One evening, I stood by the window watching the sunset and realized I wasn't replaying his words anymore. I wasn't counting his lies or tracing his absence. I was just breathing. Free. Maybe not fully healed, but free. And that's the essence of aftermath. It's not about tying everything up neatly. It's about surviving the storm and choosing to keep walking. It's about accepting that scars will stay, but they don't define you. They just prove you endured. If you've ever been there, in the wreckage, in the silence, you know how heavy it feels. But you also know this. The very act of surviving is already a victory. And with time, reflection turns wounds into wisdom. There's a moment, somewhere between the last tear and the first laugh, when you realize the story isn't about them anymore. It's about you, about what you survived, what you learned, and what you chose to carry forward. For the longest time, I thought closure would come from an apology, from hearing him say the words I had begged for in silence. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But life doesn't always hand you that kind of gift. Sometimes closure isn't given, it's created. And that's exactly what I had to do. I started small. One day, I walked into the living room and saw the framed photo we used to cherish. Instead of hiding it, I took it down. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement that this chapter had ended. That night, for the first time, I slept without replaying the same old arguments in my head. That was my closure beginning to take shape. And here's the truth. Closure isn't a single act. It's a series of choices. Choosing to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Choosing to remember without letting the memory control you. Choosing to dream again, even when the ashes are still warm. What I've learned is that healing isn't linear. Some days I feel unstoppable, like I've conquered the very storm that tried to break me. Other days, I still catch my breath when I hear a song we used to play, but that's okay. Scars don't disappear, they soften. They remind you where you've been, but they don't dictate where you're going. And maybe that's the point of all of this. Life isn't about avoiding the storms. It's about learning to walk through them, even when you're drenched, even when you're shivering. It's about finding strength in your own reflection and realizing you're not defined by the love you lost, but by the love you give yourself moving forward. So if you're listening to this and you've been in that place, the place where silence is deafening, where betrayal feels like it's etched into your skin, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're becoming. Every heartbreak, every sleepless night, every tear, none of it makes you less. It makes you more aware, more resilient, more human. Closure for me wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. A story where I'm not waiting for someone else to validate my worth. A story where I get to write the next page on my own terms. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of closure there is. So here's my final message. Don't wait for the apology that may never come. Don't waste years trying to rewrite what's already been written. Instead, turn the page, start again. Because sometimes the best ending isn't neat or perfect. It's simply moving forward with your head held high, your heart still open, and your spirit unbroken. And when you do, you'll see it. That light you thought you lost, it's still there. It's been waiting for you all along. You ever notice how the quietest moments can feel the loudest? Like when the storm finally passes and you're left standing in the silence, realizing the air is still heavy, like it's holding something back. That's where I was, right after everything that happened in B. I thought it was over. I thought the closure meant I could breathe again. But the truth? The calm didn't last. I kept replaying everything in my head, every argument, every revelation, every decision I made. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking, did I do the right thing? Or did I just scratch the surface of something bigger? Because closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it leaves behind shadows you can't ignore. At first, life looked normal. Too normal. I went back to routines, pretending like nothing was lingering beneath. But the smallest things started to feel off. A message that didn't make sense. A face that looked familiar in a place it shouldn't have been. The way people whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. And every time, this little voice inside me said, "You're not done. This story isn't finished." I tried to ignore it. I told myself, "You're overthinking. Let it go. but letting go was impossible when the cracks kept showing up. One morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door, no name, just one line written on the paper inside. "You don't know the whole truth." I froze. My hands shook as I read it again and again. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, almost taunting. I felt my chest tighten, like someone had reached into my world and pulled me back into the chaos I thought I escaped. Who sent it? Why now? And what truth was I missing? That single piece of paper unraveled every ounce of peace I had. Suddenly, I was watching everyone around me differently. Friends, neighbors, even family. Anyone could have slipped that note under my door. Anyone could have known what I didn't. And here's the thing. Once you realize you don't know the full story, you can't sit still anymore. You can't just smile and pretend. The curiosity eats you alive. It's like standing at the edge of a locked door, hearing something moving behind it, and knowing the key is somewhere close, but hidden. So I started digging, quietly at first, asking questions that seemed casual, paying closer attention to conversations I used to tune out. People noticed. They looked at me differently, almost guarded, like they knew I was searching for something. And that made me push harder. The more I searched, the more I found inconsistencies. Stories that didn't line up. Memories people swore happened one way, but I remembered differently. It was like puzzle pieces that never fit suddenly started to shift, hinting at a bigger picture, a darker one. But here's the catch. The deeper I went, the more I realized how dangerous it was. Someone didn't want me asking questions. Someone was watching. I'd catch glimpses, like the same car parked near my street 2 nights in a row, or footsteps behind me that vanished when I turned. Maybe it was paranoia, or maybe it was the truth pressing against the walls, daring me to push harder. And maybe the scariest part wasn't what I didn't know. It was the thought that the people I trusted most might be part of it. That envelope wasn't random, it was intentional, personal. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to pull me back in. So Act 1 of this new chapter? It wasn't peace. It wasn't rest. It was the unsettling realization that everything I thought was resolved might have been nothing more than the opening act. Because when someone whispers, "You don't know the whole truth," you can't help but lean closer, even if it means walking straight into the dark. And that's where I found myself again, not at an ending, but at another beginning. A fragile calm, already cracking under the weight of secrets waiting to be revealed. You ever think you finally figured people out, only to realize you've been living in their illusion the whole time? That's where I landed after the note. The one that told me I didn't know the whole truth. I couldn't let it go. I carried that piece of paper everywhere, folded, creased, shoved in my pocket like it held the answer to a question I didn't even know how to ask. It was silent proof that my story wasn't finished, no matter how much I wanted it to be. So I dug deeper. At first I thought I was being careful, asking light questions, pretending like I wasn't really searching. But you can't hide curiosity. People sense it, even before you speak. The looks got colder, conversations cut shorter, and then the first slip happened. It was at a neighborhood gathering. Just small talk, food on paper plates, laughter that felt rehearsed. One person, someone I trusted, mentioned a detail they shouldn't have known. A private moment I'd never shared outside my closest circle, and my stomach dropped. How did they know? The room spun. I tried to keep smiling, but the words echoed in my head. If they knew that, what else did they know? And why hide it until now? I left early. I remember walking home under the dim streetlights, my shadow stretching across cracked pavement. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying more than just myself, like I was carrying secrets that weren't mine to hold. The next morning, another envelope showed up, this time not under the door. It was slipped into my bag while I wasn't looking. Same sharp handwriting, same deliberate stroke. The message was shorter. Stop asking, or you'll regret it. That was the moment fear replaced curiosity. I wasn't just searching anymore. I was being hunted. Someone knew where I went, what I carried, how far I'd push, and they wanted me to back down. But you know what happens when you tell someone not to look? They look harder. I couldn't ignore it. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to let go, to stay safe, to retreat into the life I'd started to rebuild. But my heart, the part that refused to live with half-truths, pulled me forward. That's when the twist revealed itself. I discovered the trail, not by accident, but because someone underestimated me. A receipt left out on a table, a phone call overheard through a thin wall. Pieces that shouldn't have connected suddenly did. And they all pointed back to someone I never expected. Someone close. Too close. It was like the air left the room when I realized it. My chest tightened. My pulse raced. Because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones who smile while hiding the knife. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there, but instinct told me to wait, to gather more, to understand the depth of what I was walking into. So I watched them, quietly. I replayed old conversations in my head, each one sounding different under this new light. And every word, every glance, every silence felt staged. It broke something in me. I realized I'd been walking on a stage I didn't design. Every move I thought was mine had been predicted, guided, manipulated. And the worst part? The truth they were hiding wasn't just about me. It was bigger, wider, something that touched more lives than I could count. That's when the stakes changed. This wasn't about my peace anymore. It wasn't about closure. It was about survival and justice. And in that exact moment, when the betrayal became clear, something else happened. Something I didn't expect. A memory surfaced. A conversation I'd brushed off months ago, suddenly making sense in the cruelest way. It wasn't random. It was a warning. Someone had tried to tell me, and I hadn't listened. The twist wasn't just discovering the betrayal. It was realizing I'd been warned, and I ignored it. And that guilt? That's heavier than any secret. So here I was, standing at the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. Betrayed, watched, threatened. But more alive than I'd felt in months. Because when the illusion cracks, you don't go back, you step through. And I knew whatever was waiting for me in that darkness, it was going to demand everything I had left. Have you ever stood in front of a door, knowing that once you step through, you can't step back? That's what it felt like. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was waiting, and I couldn't keep circling around it. Not after everything. The betrayal still burned in my chest. The face of the one I trusted, now a mask I couldn't unsee. Every instinct told me to protect myself, to retreat, to pretend like I hadn't learned what I did. But that was the trap, wasn't it? To know just enough to keep quiet, to live in fear of what would happen if you spoke up. I couldn't do it. So I made the choice. I stepped into the fire. The confrontation happened on a night that looked too ordinary for what it carried. The kind of night where the sky was clear, the air sharp, neighbors tucked safely inside their homes. On the surface, nothing was different, but inside me, everything was trembling. I walked straight to their door. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out every other sound. I had rehearsed what I'd say, but the words kept falling apart in my head. Still, I knocked. Still, I waited. And when the door opened, I saw the look in their eyes, half surprise, half calculation. They knew. We stood there for a moment, silence thick between us. Finally, I spoke. I asked the question I'd been holding in for weeks. Why? It's strange how such a small word can hold so much weight. Why betray me? Why hide the truth? Why let me carry pain you could have eased, At first, denial. That quick shake of the head, the forced laugh, the casual deflection. But the thing about lies is they collapse when you push hard enough. And I pushed. With every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every connection I had drawn, every thread that led straight back to them. Their face changed. The mask slipped. And finally, the truth spilled out. It wasn't just about me. It never was. It was about control, about keeping certain stories buried so others could thrive, about protecting an image, a reputation, a power that would crumble if the truth surfaced. And I was collateral. The words sliced through me, because in that moment, I realized I had never been seen as family, as friend, as someone to protect. I had been a piece on a board, moved around for convenience, a sacrifice they were willing to make. It should have broken me. Maybe it did for a second. But then, something else lit up inside me. A fire I didn't know I had left. I told them no more. No more silence. No more hiding. No more carrying weight that wasn't mine. If they wanted to bury the truth, they'd have to bury me with it. And I wasn't going down easy. The room grew tense. They threatened. They begged. They switched masks faster than I could blink. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. For once, I wasn't the one cornered. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It frees you. Once you know someone has already broken you, they can't break you again, so I left. Walked out into the cold night air, my body shaking but my mind clear. I had the truth now. Not all the details maybe, but enough. Enough to understand, enough to choose. And I chose to carry it into the light. The next days were messy, words spread. Reactions poured in, shock, anger, disbelief. Some people turned away, unwilling to face it. Others leaned closer, finally sharing their own stories, their own hidden scars. And slowly, the isolation I'd been drowning in began to crack. I wasn't alone anymore. That's the closure people don't talk about. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with a neat bow tied at the end. It comes with breathing easier, with knowing you stood up when it mattered, with realizing the truth may cost you, but silence costs more. Looking back, I see now that the fire I stepped into didn't consume me. It refined me. It burned away the illusions, the masks, the lies. And what's left? It's raw. It's scarred. But it's real. And that's enough. Because sometimes the story doesn't end when you think it does. Sometimes Act 3 is just the beginning of who you're becoming. So if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever stood on the edge of a truth too heavy to carry, hear this. Stepping into the fire won't destroy you. It will reveal you. And maybe, just maybe, it'll set you free.